Hello, my friends. Kevin Swanson here with Generations. The 2025 election just happened. It represents a robust swing to the left. A Muslim communist has been elected in the New York City mayoral contest. Zoran Mamdani's dad actually is a leftist, Marxist, Muslim sympathizing university teacher. He had a penchant for endorsing terrorism and suicide bombings as a legitimate revolutionary technique. Faithful followers of Frantz Fanon. If you've read my book, Apostate, you know this philosopher was a dangerous kind of fella who masterminded the terrorism culture of the late 20th century. And oh, by the way, 266,000 innocent non-combatants have been killed by this rash of terrorism since the 1960s, largely inspired by Frantz Fanon, who was a follower of John Paul Sartre. Mamdani now is big on Islam, communism, and homosexuality, well received in the gay bars of New York City. Now, what does terrorism, communism, defunding the police, and advocating for homosexuality have to do with each other? Well, these are all means of overturning a social order. That is creating a social anarchy and destabilizing human society. Now, that should be obvious. The agenda is self-consciously destructive. Karl Marx himself referred to himself as Apollyon, or the one who has come to destroy the world. The momentum for the political swing this last election went pretty hard. Jay Jones, also a blood on the streets kind of guy, he's let's get more anarchy going out there kind of a guy. Jay Jones gets to be the fox in the hen house. That is the new attorney general for the state of Virginia. Now, a couple of things from this election of 2025. First, the blue states are mostly getting bluer, at least for now, while the red rural districts are getting redder and seeing red, I should add, when it comes to politics. The deeper shade of blue is not just in quantity, but also in quality or radicalization. For example, AOC from New York may run for president in 2028. Who knows? What does this mean? Well, polarization is the road to instability. Can you say Weimar Republic or Romanov Russia? This has been a slow but steady trend in the U.S. since 1980, and we have chronicled this carefully for the last 16 years of this broadcast, so it should be no surprise to our listening audience. But at the same time, the left is losing ground. Now, here's why. 5,645,000 young people at last count that would have made up the U.S. college-age population are no longer attending college. That is 18% of the college-age population in America have already left the college scene. This means that the left is getting more desperate. They're losing the means of monopolizing the thought life of those who are educated and those who are saturated in the mainstream media because of the decentralization of media, as in what we're doing right now. So their days are numbered. The clock is ticking. Now, remember what Jesus said in his remonstration for the Jews. This is what he said. Whenever you see a cloud rising out of the west, immediately you say a shower is coming, and so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, you say there will be hot weather, and there is. Hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it you do not discern this time? That's Luke 12, 54 and 55. Now, this unusual chastisement that was issued by our Lord Jesus Christ accuses the people of hypocrisy. Why? Because they would forecast the weather, but they could not, for the life of them, forecast the judgment of God soon to come. You see, judgment was 40 years off for these guys. Now, everything that works its way out in world history may be attributed to God's fair dealings and just judgments. All his ways are judgment. That's Deuteronomy 32:4. He shakes the world. He brings desolations in the earth. All destabilizations, revolutions, wars, economic debacles, and pandemics come by his providential and sovereign orders. And that's why it's important for us to be the ones who will discern the times and to know what is happening right now. That is, political instability is on the rise worldwide. National governments have turned over power 30 to 40 times in the last 2 decades. That's about twice the frequency of power turnovers between 1950 and 2010. So the slow but steady move towards disunity and stability over a period of 70 years here in the United States is obvious to us over a period of, say, this 70 years. The gap in partisan approval between Republicans and Democrats as to their perceptions of the sitting president has widened over time. The Democrats, they really hated the Republican president and vice versa. So these things will work out slowly over time. It's a trajectory towards the breakdown of the U.S. system of governance. That's a short segment from our chapter 10 of my new book, Under God. But let's get a conversation going on this right now. And with me today in studios, none other than Bill Jack from Worldview Academy. Welcome, Bill. It's good to have you back in studio with us. after the 2025 midterm election. Not the midterm, but one of the midterm elections. 2025 election came and went. And I think, we get a little bit of a sense of the direction of the nation with each successive election. Turns out with this election, you did not have the populist force of the personality of one Donald Trump, but you did have the left very animated. And of course, that's characteristic to swing back in a midterm election. That's what they attempted to do with what happened in New York, Virginia, and Maryland.
And the government shutdown had an impact. The Democrats capitalized on the shutdown to rally their troops.
Yeah, that would have affected Virginia because you got all these government workers in Virginia, right? I mean, I'm guessing there's a huge percentage there. So that makes a difference for sure. So yeah, they were upset with the shutdown. I think that's part of it. But wow, we have a first here. And I think we want to talk about this guy, Mamdani. Mamdani is a Muslim, an Indian, a communist, and one who evidently was popular among the gay bars in New York City. And he was elected as mayor of New York City. Now, what does that tell you? But that, wow, I think that's the first. I don't think we've ever had a Muslim and a communist lead a major city in America that I can remember. So this is a first in American history. Certainly an indication that New York City is about as post-Christian as you can get to this point, especially that he's a communist. Does it surprise you that you have a guy who's both a Muslim and a communist at the same time? Of course, I guess there's some similarities.
He would technically be labeled a democratic socialist.
That's what he wants, yeah.
Yeah.
Except for the fact
it's softer than communist.
Yeah.
It's definitely, communist is even softer than Marxist.
His heritage is not exactly that.
No.
But a pro-homosexual Muslim and communist, and I made that point in my opening remarks, that to be a communist, to be a revolutionary, to be a Muslim with some background in supporting the idea of Muslim terrorism, which we find from his father anyway, and at the same time encouraging sexual anarchy in the case of homosexuality. So you bring all these together, and he's also somewhat anti-police. So in that regard, he is in favor of some level of anarchical, activity on the streets of New York. So he's in favor of anarchy, communism, homosexuality, which is sexual forms of anarchy. This is an indication that we have somebody who is committed to social disintegration and destabilization. And this really was a Marxist agenda from the beginning. Marx really did confess himself to be the destroyer. His goal was to destroy human society. And that's precisely what these guys want to do. Don't know if he's self-conscious about it. It may or may not be. As a politician.
I think he is.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah, I think he is. And it's interesting because people find the combination of a fascist or a Marxist with Islam to be a bit odd, but it wasn't during World War II. Muslim nations aligned with Nazi Germany. They were allies. And so this idea of Islam being opposed to Marxism or fascism or Nazism is not true. It goes hand in glove. It's a totalitarian view of government.
Yeah, exactly. They're both fairly coercive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you think about a Muslim country, you think it similar to a Nazi country or a communist country, right? I mean, you're going to go into a Muslim country, you're most likely going to be tyrannized. I mean, I think everybody understands that. That's just what Muslims do. They tyrannize people. So there's no sense of a Christian form of liberty in these sorts of countries. Now, this is the first time, as far as I know, in the United States of America where a communist, or one at least with communist leanings, as much as this man has communist leanings, has been elected to a high office. Historically, Ben Davis was elected to the New York City Council in 1943, 1945, ran on the American Labor Party, but he was effectively what Mamdani is. So he is a communist. John Bernard was elected as a Minnesota lower house rep in 1939. Now you notice that this comes out of that period of time of the 1930s and early 1940s where communism was on the roll in the United States. And of course, you eventually get to FDR, and FDR is one of your most socialist, communist-leaning presidents ever. But this guy's a self-conscious socialist. I think he would call himself a socialist, and effectively, this is the same as a communist. And so you have this guy, Mamdani. His father, was radical. He's sadly a chancellor for the International University of Uganda in Kampala. He advocates terrorism. He's got a book, came out in 2004, called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, America, the Cold War, and the Roots of Terror. And Mamdani said that suicide bombers should be recognized as, quote, a category of soldier, and that it should be understood, quote, as a feature of modern political violence rather than stigmatized as a mark of barbarism. And as I said in my introductory remarks, this guy was very much influenced by Frantz Fanon, who was the mastermind behind the terrorism of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. He basically, Frantz Fanon was a follower of Jean Paul Sartre, and eventually became the major spokesman for the blood on the streets approach to revolutions in Africa. So, and that's why approximately 250,000 people have been slaughtered by terrorists because of Frantz Fanon. But Frantz Fanon very much influenced Mamdani's father, Mahmoud Mamdani, who has rose to academic prominence by weaving kind of a Marxist materialism into African post-colonial analysis. Mamdani was groomed by his far-left parents to become a radical activist in the communist mold. His father, as I said, a Marxist professor of African history in Columbia University. And Mamdani's housing advisor is Kea Weaver. In 2017, she tweeted, "Elect more communists." And then the next year, she tweeted this, "Seize private property." So this is not, these guys are hanging out with communists. They're basically communists revived in the 21st century. You thought communism was dead, didn't you? You thought it was gone.
No, because you have the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA.
Yeah.
They're not a political party, but they're a political nonprofit organization. And when you list their members who have held elected office, you include Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, who are in the U.S. House of Representatives. So there are 40 DSA members who have held elected office. And it's the Democratic Socialist Party.
Yeah, which effectively are the communists of the modern day. Right.
So, you've got Jamal Bowman, you got Cory Bush. So they are Marxists. They just don't want to be
They don't want the name
labeled
necessarily on the front page of their books. Mamdani's agenda thus far: defund the police to zero, disarm law enforcement, nationalize key industries, abolish ICE, obviously that would be a big thing, and create city-owned grocery stores as sort of a small introduction to communism. I mean, government-owned means of productions was a big deal for Mamdani. I mean, he's actually said the end goal of seizing the means of production is a priority. That's what he said. And Mamdani is very much used to using the exact language that Karl Marx has used. He supports a social housing bill that would allow New York State to seize private property for the purpose of renovation and rehabilitation. So, and on it goes. So Mamdani would be the first major socialist communist leader of a major city/state in the United States. You think about New York. New York is probably larger population base than Colorado, for example. So we're looking at, probably one of the most significant advancements of the communist agenda in the history of this country. And that's significant. Yeah.
And you're going to find, and there are already indications that people are fleeing New York City. And Florida is a popular destination for those people. They're snowbirds. They go down there in the winter, but they're moving there permanently. And the governor of Florida has opened his arms to them. And Trump has talked about people leaving and fleeing New York for climes like Florida.
And this, I think, is another indication of what we call the national polarization, which has been going on since the 1980s, since roughly Gerald Ford. Since the administration of Gerald Ford, the American political system has radically polarized. And in fact, it's affecting some states. Now, I say in both quality and quantity, states are turning bluer and areas of the country are turning redder. So some are turning red, and I said seeing red. And some are turning blue and bluer and bluer. Now, bluer in terms of quantity, that is the percentage of people in those states that are voting blue, as well as in sort of quality of their worldview and their vision. I mean, let's face it, Mandami is extremely blue. If you look at him, he's like dark blue. Have you seen his skin? He's dark blue, which means he's pretty committed to a leftist, communist, totalitarian, government approach to everything that the Word of God is against.
Right.
So if you look at the swings, I mean, take Virginia, for example. In the 2013 election, the Dems won the gubernatorial race by 2.5%. In the 2017 race, they got it by 8.9%. The Repubs came back in 2021. You remember that? It was actually on parental involvement in education. But the Repubs got it by 2%. But this election, the Dems have it by what looks like 25%.
Wow.
The Dems won the gubernatorial race in Virginia by a whopping 25%, which means that's a massive, massive, massive. And at the same time, they took the attorney general race with the guy, the blood in the streets, just get out there and shoot everybody kind of attorney general. That's about as fox in the hen house as you can get. Right. You know what I'm saying? If you want a fox in the hen house, you go out and get somebody who's all about anarchy on the streets and you make him attorney general for your state. I mean, that's a really good idea. Those Virginians, boy, do they know what they're doing. Man alive. Get that fox in the hen house and let's see how the whole hen house blows up. See what happens there. Well, it turns out the Dems got the attorney general race by 7%. It wasn't even close. Wasn't even close. Repubs have had it. Repubs have had the attorney general in Virginia from 1993 all the way through, I'm going to say 2013. So for 20 years, they had the attorney general office. Well, it's swung now, the Dems. The Dems got it in 2013, 2017 by just a little bit. And then in 2025, the Dems got the attorney general position in the state of Virginia by a whopping 7%, at least according to the last results I've seen. So
it's interesting.
So that's significant, really significant. Yeah. You see the blue swing here?
In 2022, the Democratic Socialists of America had elected over 120 candidates to local office. In 2025, there are over 250 Democratic Socialists of America.
They're making progress.
Members in office.
Ththey making progress. So
with 90% elected after, 90% of them were elected after 2019.
After 2019, which would have been sometimes during the Trump administration. Okay, the first Trump administration. This is a swing to the left, but the red is swinging to the red, and the blue is swinging to the blue, and there's a more, I guess I would call it epistemological self-consciousness, consistency about their position. The left is saying we are more and more committed to the leftist agenda than we have ever been in the history of this country. That's really what the blue is doing at this point in American history. And so what I would say is at this point, the red is turning redder and the blue is turning bluer. But what's interesting is that you've got the rural districts. Used to be about a 6% plus on Republican voting. It's upwards of 25% now. So over the last 20 years, we have seen an increasing percentage of the rural communities going red, Republican/Trump. But at the same time, Bill, they're not turning increasingly red because they're turning increasingly biblical. They're not exactly increasingly pro-life. They're just increasingly anti-immigration. Are you with me? In other words, the blue is turning increasingly communist and totalitarian. The red is more interested in keeping the Mexicans out of the country, but not as interested in the pro-life cause. So I'm just saying...
I would agree with you. They're certainly not interested in the pro-life cause. Mm-hmm. I think there may be other factors besides immigration that would affect the rural communities going more red. I think what we're seeing is not liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat. It may be what you have hit on, and that is that it's more rural versus urban.
Certainly it's that.
And the value systems that you see in rural America are not the same that you see in urban America. Mm-hmm. And so those values may be divided, but you're correct that the country in general, whether it be rural or urban, is not turning more pro-life. Now, there's some hope in the younger generation, in this upcoming generation, that they are becoming more pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
But for the vast majority of voters, that is a non-starting issue. You know, they don't want to hear about the social issues. They don't want to hear about pro-life issues. They don't want to hear about homosexuality and transgenderism. They just want their economics. It goes back to Bill Clinton. It's the economy, stupid. Remember that one? That was his mantra. He got elected because he just focused on the economy.
So what does this mean? What this means is America is becoming increasingly polarized. And as I said in my introductory comments, the approval gap for Dwight D. Eisenhower between Republicans and Democrats and who liked him, about 39%. So not, there's some partisan difference concerning people's perspective of Dwight D. Eisenhower. But fast forward to today, it's 85%. The polarization, the political polarization between Democrat and Republican on their presidential approval metric for Donald Trump is 85%. Now, friends, remember that political instability is one of the first indications of hard times ahead. World War II formed out of a seedbed of great discontent and disunity in Germany. The Weimar Republic fractured, terribly. 14 different chancellors took the job between 1921 and 1933. The Reichstag was blown apart in fights between the communists and the National Socialists, both of which were equally antagonistic to a biblical world and life view. Extremism was the order of the day, but both sides were extremely evil, enthusiastically committed their agendas. Well-timed assassinations incited further division and violence. Armed paramilitary groups like the SA had identified the enemy as Jews and communists, while themselves were committed to a godless worldview and sexual perversions, et cetera, et cetera. Hyperinflation crisis 1922, then the Great Depression 1929, added fuel to the instability, and voila, that's how you get Adolf Hitler, and that's how you finally get to World War II. Now, political instability is on the rise worldwide in our day as well. National governments have turned over power, get this, about 40 times in the last 2 decades, but about twice the frequency of the power turnovers that occurred between 1950 and 2010. So the 60 years prior to that, there was only about 15 or 20 power turnovers. Now there's been about 40 power turnovers in just the last 20 years. And we've seen a ton of them in just the last 3 to 4 years. So same thing's happening to the United States. We're seeing polarization of political systems. I'm just saying, friends, you've got to be able to tell the weather. Jesus said you got to know the weather forecast. And I think it's important to know the weather forecast. He called, the Jews at the time hypocrites because you know the weather forecast, but you can't tell when judgment's coming. What's wrong with you people? So I think we need to know something about this ourselves. Now, it turns out also, as we consider the blue states that are getting bluer and bluer, by the way, the states that have gotten bluer and bluer include the state of Colorado, Virginia, Delaware, Massachusetts, Maryland, Georgia, and Arizona. And so I wanted to focus in upon those states and say, well, why is that happening? It turns out the reason for this is if you take a look at the degree of education happening within these states and the percentage of people in these states that have gone through the blue universities, it turns out that those percentages are extremely high. In fact, this is almost a perfect correlation between the blueness of a state and the percentage of people that make it through the indoctrination centers we typically refer to as universities. And so you look at, the blue states, the states that have gotten bluer since 1999 or 2000, Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Georgia, California, Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, and New Jersey. So those are 10 states. They've gotten bluer and bluer. And by the way, California's got a new way to gerrymander, so they'll get 5 more blue out of it. See, again, getting bluer and bluer, and then consequently throwing a few more congressmen / women into Congress on the side of the Dems. But the bachelor degree or higher percentage of these particular states, 42%, 44%, 34%, 36%, 41%, 36%, 35%, 43%. So they're fairly high. Now, I wanted to know, okay, what about the red states? How are the red states doing on the same metric? So that was the question that I asked. And I came up with this. The reddest states in America, West Virginia, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. And their percentages are 24%, 26, 23, 26, 22, 27. It's almost a perfect correlation between, an educated state that's been through the blue universities, properly indoctrinated, and those that are not. So now here's, of course, the good news. The good news is that college enrollment has shifted tremendously. It's down 3.3% since 2020. It's a loss of 630,000 students in just the last 4 years. And here's the big number. In 2008, Bill, 81% of college-aged kids, 18 to 24 years of age, were in college. So get that number, 81%. This year, 63%. Wow. So this is probably the biggest demographic shift going on in the country today, which means if you are a Democrat, you're panicking. You're hitting the panic switch right now. This may be some of the best news that we have ever shared on this radio program, friends. And I just did the numbers as well on the previous section. 5,600,000 college-age students have left the reservation, and they're becoming plumbers, electricians, and doing other stuff. They're not sitting in these classes anymore.
When they do that, they have to engage with real-life consequences to policies that are enacted, and it tends to push those who are in the workspace toward a more conservative position, as opposed to those who are sitting in classrooms and hearing nothing but the liberal claptrap.
But if you're a leftist right now and you listen to this program, now I trust there are no leftists listening to the program.
Oh, come on.
I trust there's no
Come
leftists
on.
listening. But if you were a leftist listening to the program right now, Bill, what would you think? I mean, you're panicking, right? You're hitting the desperate panic switch, and you're probably going to have to do something quickly. You're probably going to have to turn the nation quickly in one direction or the other, because if the colleges are incapable of indoctrinating the next generation in their socialism and communism, the left may lose this thing.
I think you're being overly optimistic.
What? Yeah. Me? Overly optimistic?
Yes, I think so.
Bill,
because
Bill.
Number one, they still have the high schools and the junior high schools and the elementary schools.
That's true, yeah.
So they will continue to indoctrinate. It is not education, it's an indoctrination, a state indoctrination. And so you're not going to see any change there. Plus, the left is targeting, as we have seen here in Colorado, conservative school boards, and they're overturning them, as they did in Douglas County in this election.
They did.
They did. So Douglas County now has gone blue in its school board.
That may be a factor of the fact that our state is blue. I mean, it could be the blueness of the state of Colorado is affecting the conservative counties.
Those people who are fleeing Denver and Denver County are coming south to Douglas County.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. The other factor is that the left still has the media.
They still do. But there has been a decentralization of media.
Yeah.
Everybody and their kid brother's got a podcast right now. That makes a difference. ABC, CBS, and NBC do not have total control like they used to.
I agree.
So it turns out, Bill, and listening audience, please understand that Jesus is in control of this. God is over all things, and he will determine the direction that this nation goes. But it's going to be a fight, Bill, and I think if young people go to college, I want to say this. If young people go to college, and I went to college, you got to stand like Charlie Kirk would stand. You've got to stand. You got to speak. You got to take a stand on the cause of righteousness, and you cannot be neutral, right? You cannot be giving way, compromising, conceding to the left on any of this. And by the way, that's exactly what I did. When I went to college, Bill, it was the liberal thing. Yeah, the college was the leftist, the democratic, socialistic, communistic, pro-homosexual, pro-gay thing was very, very, very active on my college campus in the 1980s. But Bill, you know what I did? I joined the pro-life club. I pushed back. I ran for student body president. I actually stood and opposed the sexual anarchy that was starting to rise up on the campus. I took a position. And Bill, I think I made a difference. And I think students can. But at the end of the day, Bill, what we need to do is we need to defund education. And without that, if we don't defund, if we cannot defund the government support of public schools, then I think we're going to lose this thing. Because ultimately, socialism is absolute, and communism is absolutely dependent on government-funded education. That is the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto. So honestly, I think in terms of strategy, if we cannot defund the socialist schools, then the students that go through the socialist schools that are paid for by socialist monies will no doubt come out as socialists pretty much every time. So that, I believe, is the belly of the beast on this thing.
Well, we see that, as I said, in the recent school board election here in Douglas County. The parents who voted have already been indoctrinated by the state school system into a pro-homosexual, pro-transgender, pro-death, as not pro-life, position on those social issues. And because the schools have been one-sided in indoctrinating in that direction. Now, can Christians have an impact? Yes, but we don't, because Christians don't know, number one, their liberties, and they cower in fear as a result. But students, Christian students who are trapped in the state schools can have an impact if they know their liberties and they exercise their liberties. The biggest problem in the state schools? Christian public school teachers. Because they don't know their liberties, and therefore they retreat. Or they say, if I say anything, I'll lose my paycheck, I'll lose my job. And so they are silenced that way. I know this because I did that for the first 7 years that I taught in the public schools in Southern Illinois. So I understand it. I understand the pressure that's brought to bear on those who are Christians in the system. But we are to be at war with that system because the system is itself unbiblical. The jurisdiction of education, as we have talked about many times, belongs with the parents, not with the state. The state has an interest in having an educated citizenry, absolutely. But should the state be in charge of education? Absolutely not. That's where the parents come in.
Friends, we are dealing with some political instability like we've never seen since World War II. And that's worldwide. And the stats are obvious. You can just find them online. They're there. And we've been chronicling this for a long time with theworldview.com and with this program. We're heading for a major battle. And I think America is going to be ground zero for this battle. Because America is really where you've got the largest percentage of Christians who stand on a biblical worldview. Name another nation in which that happens. There is no other nation. America is the battlefield. And we may be heading for a civil war. I don't know. But one thing for sure, don't just be a conservative. The conservatives are heading for too many diversions. Identify the rock-solid principles that matter to God. Develop your foundation on a biblical standard. And of course, the principles on which the nations were founded is something we can start with. But the biblical foundations of the nation, identify those principles, the principles that matter to God. And I tell you what, the pro-life principle is right there in the center of it all. And then take a stand, be salt, and fight, because you're fighting for the soul of a nation. In this generation, we may not win it in this generation, but it only takes a minority to stand up and fight for that which is right. Well, that wraps up this edition of Generation. To encourage you to my book, The Story of Freedom, which pretty much summarizes where we are in this struggle in this generation. Again, it's called The Story of Freedom, available at generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Bill Jack inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.